Welcome to Drama or Trauma Supporting the Education of African American Girls. My name is Natasha Mullen. Just a little bit about me. I have a master's in education, school counseling. I'm a licensed professional counselor of mental health, also a licensed master social worker, approved clinical supervisor. I am the CEO of Milestones Consultants, which is a group practice in Delaware. I am the founder of Practice Makes Perfect Consultation Group, which is a consultation group in Delaware that is only for private practice clinicians. I am the co-executive director of Impact Delaware, which is a nonprofit in Delaware. That's something that me and my husband started in 2004 for gender-based programming for youth and their families. I am the Unique Leadership Program Director, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about my youth group that I've been doing with young ladies since 2004. Here is my contact information, and so let's get started. So the objectives, I categorize the objectives using the ARISE model, which is a model that I developed and use in supervision, I use in trainings, and I also use with my clients. And so the ARISE model includes awareness, recognize, being intentional, self-care, and to educate. Objectives are increase awareness of the prevalence and impact of mental health problems and traumatic experiences in African American girls, recognize the impact of past experiences and toxic stress on African American girls' brains and behavioral responses, ways to be intentional to create a safe place for African American girls to manage mental health challenges and psychological adversity, importance of teaching and practicing self-care to prevent re-traumatizing African American girls and vicarious trauma, and the importance to educate our students, colleagues, other family members in our community, what we learn. And so let's talk about awareness of drama or trauma. I'm going to read you this short poem. I am not dramatic. My life's been traumatic. You can call me rude because I correct you when you call me the wrong name. And when I consider your slick remarks as disrespectful instead of just a game. I act the way I do because I've seen a lot of things and I've heard more about my gender, my race, and my looks than I've seen drops of rain. Always feeling devalued and invisible, and all the negativity being a Black girl brings. So I raise my voice to be heard because I know what it's like to be dismissed, ignored, or silenced. I snatch my head because it's my body's response to the seriousness of my words. I'm not easily offended, but easily triggered, and I have to protect that little Black girl in me at all costs. That little Black girl who feels she's not good enough, feels unsafe, and fears being a failure. The girl who spent most of her life feeling she wasn't in control. I have to protect her now that I can. So see, I'm not aggressive. I'm not this angry Black female who wants to cause harm. What you see is how I control my outcome, my safety, my body. I'm not dramatic. Life's been traumatic. The reason I wrote that poem is because often when I'm working with African American young ladies, I always hear, these expectations, these assumptions about them just because they're African American. They're either too loud, they're too Black, they're too white, they're too grown, too scary, too aggressive or argumentative, too much attitude. And so when you're thinking about, these young ladies having to always deal with these stereotypes, you can imagine that sometimes, they're perceived as being these angry people or they have an attitude. And sometimes their behavior reflects that frustration. One of the activities I do sometimes with my young ladies is called Because I Am. And basically what that is saying, because I am, and they're fill in the blank, like because I am a female does not mean I am blank. And so that activity is really showing how often we have to deal with so many different stereotypes as being a female, as being a Black, and especially as being a Black female. So let's check in. I just want to just take a moment, and just because I'm a counselor and this just kind of makes sense, you always want to kind of check in and see how you're feeling. So for instance, when you're hearing that poem, How did it land on you? What came up for you? Maybe you thought of a particular student, maybe you thought of yourself. It's always important to kind of check in to see how your body responds, your own thoughts and feelings. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But always notice what's going on with you. And if you need to kind of take care of yourself, maybe it means getting a glass of water, or maybe it's means, having some quiet time, taking a break. But always kind of make sure that you check in and make sure that you're good. Okay, so what is trauma? Basically, trauma is when something happened that overwhelms our ability to cope. It overwhelms our ability to manage through the event, and it usually leaves a long-lasting effect. And so types of trauma, of course, are abuse, neglect, abandonment, even national disasters, harassment. Medical issues is another big one. If you had like a medical experience, like a surgery or something like that. Complex traumas, just when someone has experienced multiple traumas. And what is interesting, and based on the ACEs, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment, usually someone who has experienced one trauma has experienced more than one trauma. And so most of the students, most of the young ladies that you're seeing have dealt with multiple types of trauma. And then the last one is vicarious trauma. And basically what that is when we're hearing other people's information, we're hearing other people's stories. And so not only as professionals do we get to hear about other people's traumas, but also our young ladies hear a lot about other people's traumas, whether it's their friendships, whether it's people in their family, whether it's on the news and social media. We are inundated with people's traumas. And sometimes that has an effect on us as if we're experiencing a traumatic experience ourselves. Just going to talk briefly about ACEs because I know that most of you who are watching this are pretty familiar. But once again, these are ACEs. And so what they're called is adverse childhood experiences. These are the different things that are considered traumas throughout someone's childhood that affects them as they get older and even into adulthood. And so some of the ones that kind of stand out is witnessing domestic violence. So when you're thinking about our African-American young ladies, they're witnessing domestic violence. They're witnessing violence in their own homes, sometimes against their parents. Sometimes it could be sibling violence. Mental illness is another big one. When you're thinking about having family members, maybe once again, another sibling or a parent or a grandmother who may have depression or anxiety, or maybe some of the other type of disorders such as bipolar or borderline or narcissistic personality disorders. And so, of course, when you're dealing and living with someone day to day who has a mental illness, it tends to affect your own makeup and your own mental health as well. Another significant one is attachment. And so attachment is when a child does not have a biological parent in their life. It could be a father, it could be a mother, maybe they're raised by an aunt or a grandmother or whatever. But attachment is a major trauma because it disrupts the normal developmental stages. You can just imagine how traumatic that could be, especially if a father is inconsistent or mother is maybe struggling with substance abuse and not in the child's life. Just the amount of strong emotions, feelings, and thoughts about self that causes. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how these ACEs, these experiences affect our young ladies' thoughts about themselves. And that's one thing that's significant about when you think about trauma. It's not just the event, it is how these events make us feel about ourselves. And so this is just an expanded ACEs. Some of the ones that was, after the original study, they added, some more. And so some of these is bullying, community violence, neighborhood safety, when you're living in a neighborhood that you feel is not safe, racism, and living in foster care, which of course goes back to that attachment thing. So these experiences, if you're thinking about our young ladies that are experiencing emotional abuse and sexual abuse and physical abuse, having family dysfunction and incarcerated relatives, I haven't talked about that yet. having someone in your home, once again, whether it was a parent or someone, a close loved one, a sibling, where they're incarcerated, and how that shifts the family dynamic, how that shifts the opinions, the feelings and thoughts that young lady may have about herself. And then, of course, neglect, physical or emotional neglect. And once again, not knowing, not having your basic needs met, and how that can affect you as a young person and also as into adulthood. Talking about African American girls specifically, when we're talking about abuse, 54% psychological, 40% physical, and 17% sexual. So of our young ladies who have experienced abuse, these are the statistics, but we also want to keep in mind something else about African American culture, and specifically African American girls, how much of this is not reported. And it is an estimate that only 1/3 of abuse is reported in our African American communities. So if you think about that and you're looking at these percentages, of course, they're not really correct, because a lot of it is not even reported. It's kind of that thing, you keep it quiet, you keep it private, you don't disrupt. And I'll go back to, some of that comes from, unfortunately, slavery days, or when Black people were mistreated. If the police were called, you may not ever see your loved one again. You might never see your husband again. And so that generational trauma has been passed down in our lives, where you don't call the cops on your family. You don't get the cops involved. You don't get other people involved. And so a lot of times things are kept hidden in our churches, in our communities. Things are not being reported because that generational trauma is still passed down today, about not really getting the police involved. If you think about the really recent police brutality, all of those reasons play into why a lot of this stuff is not reported. Because of course you want justice, but you don't want your loved one being killed by a police officer. And so it's just something to kind of think about. These numbers, of course, are unfortunately not accurate. 6 in 10 African American women reported being subjected to coercive sexual content by the age of 18. So once again, if you're thinking about your students who have experienced sexual assault, sexual coercion, rape, all of these different things that may be sitting in your classroom or in your community groups, or sitting in front of you in a session. 1 in 4 African American girls will be sexually abused before the age of 18. So just some things to kind of keep in mind, that with some of the things that our African American girls have experienced. And I just want to go back again to police brutality with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and some of these other incidents that were heavily flooded in social media. These things cause these young ladies to be very fearful for their fathers, for their brothers, for their cousins, and just the traumatic effect of some of these situations. Once again, that vicarious trauma that could have played a role on their behaviors and their thoughts and their feelings about themselves and their loved ones. So how does some of this stuff play out? Now, once again, we have to keep in mind that a lot of things are not reported. A lot of things in our community are not reported. These statistics are from 2019. Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for African American girls and women ages 5 to 19. 5th leading cause of death in ages 10 to 14 and 25 to 29. So, but once again, we have to keep in mind of the low report rate, and how some things are taken care of and handled within the home, within the church, within the community, and not being reported. Illicit substance abuse use among African American women, 6.2% higher than the national average. Of course, our young ladies are less likely to get counseling than our white counterparts. So once again, dealing with all of these emotions, dealing with all of these traumatic experiences, but less likely to get counseling. One of those reasons are financial barriers, not having the money. It could be transportation barriers. It could definitely be the stigma of mental health itself, and why, is I don't want to be looked at crazy. I don't want people to think I'm off or whatever. And so being taught to kind of struggle in silence because that's what their parents did and that's what their grandparents did. Learning to just shut up and keep it moving. And so once again, low numbers reported, but if you're thinking about the high number of depression and anxiety in just our whole community, our whole environment, our whole world, our whole culture, you can imagine that these numbers are much higher for our African American girls, especially since after COVID. Okay. So next, recognize. We're moving on to recognize. And I always like to show this picture because, and then I usually ask the artists, what do you think about this picture? Like, what comes up for you when you see this picture? Like, how do you view this young lady, And of course, some people will say, she has an attitude, or she's too grown, or she's got too much mouth. Some people may say, she's strong, or she's bold. She's not going to put up with anything. She's going to let you know how it is, kind of thing. And I think this picture is so important because it dictates kind of our assumption about some of our young ladies when their arms are crossed, or maybe they raise their voice, or maybe, they roll their eyes or snatch their head, like I said in the poem. It's kind of this assumption of how they are. And so I think it's very important for us to recognize how we see our African American young ladies. How we see, do we feel like, oh, they have attitudes, or they have bad attitudes, or they're rude, or they're too loud, or they're verbally aggressive, or they're too aggressive, or they're too assertive, or they're not assertive enough, or whatever. Just kind of keep it in mind for ourselves, kind of recognizing ourselves what our own views are and thoughts are about our young ladies. Recognize effects of our trauma lens. So when our young ladies experience trauma, it starts a theme within us, a theme that plays over and over and over again in our minds. It starts these thoughts about ourselves, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And so because we have these themes, it dictates kind of how we view ourselves, how we view others, and how we view the world. And based on how we view others, ourselves, in the world, it also dictates how we behave, how we show up. It creates this fight, flight, fawn, or freeze mode in situations maybe we don't need them. So maybe I'm already on the defense about something, or maybe I'm already on guard about something, even though I might not need it. Maybe I don't need to respond in that way, So if a teacher says something to me, I may pop off because once again, I want to be able to defend myself, protect myself. I've experienced situations where maybe I was disrespected. And so now I'm not going to be disrespected. Maybe I was bullied when I was younger. And so now I'm ready to fight. Or maybe I avoid situations altogether. Maybe I don't go in the cafeteria, or maybe I avoid going to places because I feel like I can't keep myself safe or protect myself or be in control. Maybe I people please to keep relationships close. Maybe I have attachment issues where mommy and daddy weren't in the home, and so I cling to negative relationships. Maybe guys that I should have let go long ago, or friendships where they mistreat me. Or maybe I just don't do nothing. Maybe I'm numb. Maybe I'm silent. Maybe I shut down. And so these survival skills, these modes that we've created based on, once again, our trauma lens and how we see the world. This drama, so to speak, our dramatic experiences come from a place of fear and worry. Fear and worry of something that has happened in the past. The fear of being a failure. The fear of rejection. the fear of being hurt physically or emotionally, the fear of being out of control, explosive, not prepared. I know some young ladies, they really work on not getting angry because they feel that if they get angry, they're going to have this out of control. You may have heard young ladies say that they black out. They black out because they're so overwhelmed with emotion that they don't even recognize what they're doing. Or the fear of being alone. And because of these fears, due to past experiences, they develop these survival skills that speak loudly. I don't ever want to feel that way again. And so their behavior is as such. Thoughts from the trauma lens include, I am not safe. I am not in control. I am helpless. It's my fault. I am not good or smart enough. What is wrong with me? So once again, because of these experiences, I have these thoughts and feelings about myself. These thoughts and feelings of being unsafe. And so because I feel unsafe, if I feel that you're coming at me, or you're standing over top of me, or maybe you're shouting or hollering at me, I may respond. Now, I may respond aggressively, I might come back, or I may shut down. If I feel like I'm out of control, that things are happening, maybe this major change, a lot of people move around a lot, don't have any, maybe they're staying at one house one night, they don't have any control of kind of their environment. They didn't have a control of dad leaving or mom's drug situation or whatever the case may be. Because I didn't have control in those situations, I'm going to work hard to be controlling in this situation or in my life now. And so these negative thoughts of self cause these dramatic behaviors, these dramatic responses. And what are these dramatic responses? Of course, they come from the unwanted thoughts and feelings of fear. We talked about it. Guilt, embarrassment, shame, and being out of control. And so because we felt this way and we don't want to feel this way again, we don't want to feel rejected like we did when we were in third grade, when we didn't have anyone to play with us and they left us alone and I was bullied. They don't want to feel rejected when dad is inconsistent about showing up, or mom is out of the picture and you're watching all these other people have their parents with them. Because they don't want to feel those feelings, we create what we call these defense mechanisms. And we're probably familiar with defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are protectors. Sometimes we don't like the way they show up, but they're actually protectors. They're actually survival skills. So when you think of a dramatic response, I want you to think of it in the way of a survival skill, in a way that how I managed through some really hard stuff, how I was able to get through some really challenging things in my life. Maybe it was the fight. Maybe it was the shutdown. Maybe I became a perfectionist because I had this fear of failure that I had to overwork. I had to overachieve. I had to make sure that I got straight A's. Or maybe because I had this fear of failure, I didn't try at all. I didn't bother. I seemed not motivated, or maybe some people would maybe even label it as lazy. Or maybe I needed to be prepared because I don't like that feeling of not being in control. I don't like surprises. I don't like changes. Maybe once again, another defense mechanism. I avoid certain places, certain people, things that remind me of that feeling that I experienced with that traumatic experience. Maybe it's a place that reminds me, or a voice or tone that reminds me of that traumatic experience. And so maybe I avoid those people, those places, those things, those situations to prevent those feelings. But then what happens when I am triggered? I've worked really hard to prevent. Maybe I've worked really hard to not have those feelings of failure, of not feeling good enough. of not feeling out of control. But what happens when I am triggered and I have these emotions? That's when we call the firefighters come in. And a firefighter response is kind of this out of control instant response. It's almost like a firefighter. All it wants to do is go in and put the fire out. It wants to take away that feeling. It doesn't, and so what happens with that, just like a firefighter, it can't worry about the damage control. I'm not thinking about getting suspended in that moment. I'm not thinking about how I hurt that girl's feelings or how I hurt that girl physically. I'm not thinking about that in the moment. The only thing I'm thinking about is I don't like this feeling I feel right now. And I want it to stop. And so sometimes firefighters can look like shutting down. It could look like binge eating, drinking, smoking, drugs, sex, sometimes being very promiscuous, procrastination, sometimes just not liking that feeling of failure. Maybe I put off that assignment. Maybe I don't touch it. Maybe I just don't even turn in the test. Just kind of like that giving up feeling once again, because I don't like that feeling of failure, so why bother? Lashing out, snapping, tripping, popping off. And of course, fighting. And so we have these different dramatic responses that probably look a lot like some of the behavior that you see in your classrooms, in your groups, in your clients. These dramatic responses, which I think of as survival skills. This is how they've learned to navigate this hard stuff in their life. The only thing is their body doesn't distinguish that they don't need it now. They don't need it in that classroom with that teacher. Their body that is distinguished, they don't need that defense. And so they respond. And so a lot of times we see that dramatic response. Some of the personalities that some of our young ladies have. Superwoman, very young. Some of our young ladies have taught, you can handle it. Be tough. We don't have time to cry. You gotta keep moving. You gotta keep doing. I have so many of my clients that tell me that their mom has told them not cry. We used to hear it about boys, but these girls, suck it up. We don't have time for this. So they learn to have this superwoman mentality where I have to be tough. I have to be strong. I can't let people see that I'm weak. Some of these superwomen are also the ones that everybody comes to. Even these young ladies, very young in their families, may be the ones for their siblings or even their parents. Some of our parentified young ladies are the support for even their parents, working hard so that their mother is not stressed or their dad is not getting overwhelmed, working hard to be that sounding board for their parent, even at a very young age. They learn to be a people pleaser. They, allow people to take advantage of them, or they work really hard in relationships that are not good for them. They work really hard to keep friendships of maybe friends who have betrayed them, or maybe talk about them, or very critical of them. Maybe they're so giving, because they don't want that feeling of rejection. And some of these other ones, being an aggressor, once again, I'm going to be in control of the situation. I'm not going to let her pop off at me and catch me off guard. I'm going to go to her, and I'm going to go with her with my girls. She's talking to me. She disrespected me. I'm coming back at her. Drama queen, the ones who are always in stuff. And the drama queen is very interesting, because if you think about it, it makes sense. If you are used to chaos, if you are used to being around a lot of chaotic people and a lot of arguing or a lot of stuff going on, when things are quiet, when things are okay, there's a little uneasiness with them. Because you don't know when something's going to drop. You don't know when something's going to pop off. So it's almost even more anxious provoking when things are at peace. So if I can control the narrative by getting things going, by starting things, by getting them arguing, now there's chaos. Okay, Chaos is where I feel safer. That's my comfort zone because at least I know what's going on. I know what's happening. It's that anticipation of what might happen that is so anxiety provoking. You know, sometimes you'll hear of people who are living in abusive relationships will actually instigate the abuser, kind of like get it over with, because the anticipation of when it's going to happen is so anxiety provoking. I talked a little bit before about the overcompensator, the perfectionist. Being on defense, always ready. You got to be ready. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready, so to speak. Always on guard. Always making sure you're watching your back. The busy bee, staying very busy so that you won't think, you won't feel. As long as I stay busy, one of the things I ask my young ladies is, what is on your mind when it's time to go to bed? When you're in bed and you're trying to go to sleep? Because usually we stay so busy, or they go from one thing to the next. And that's another thing about that drama queen too. It's that busyness of it. So sometimes we're going from one thing to the next, and we're going for this, and we're going to this, and it's all to keep our mind occupied, so that we don't have to think about what we feel about ourselves based on our past experiences. The avoider procrastinator, I talked a little bit about that. The victim, they're always, why me? Why did this happen to me? They're sharing their story with everyone. They want people to feel sorry for them. They want people, once again, that's kind of that fawn kind of look out for me kind of thing, take care of me personality that comes from trauma. And then the last one is foreboding joy. And basically what that is it's hard for me to experience happiness in these moments. It's hard for me to truly enjoy myself because I'm always worried about that shoe is going to fall. I remember the last time when I was having fun and then this happened. Or we had a great time at the amusement park. And then when we got back home, Dad was so angry and he beat up Mom. And so it's really hard to enjoy the good moments, the happiness. It's really hard to enjoy those moments because I have to be ready for the shoe to drop, for it to happen, for that bad thing to happen. I have to prevent it at all costs. I can't let my guard down. And so I just wanted to kind of throw this in here because what happens is we all have a window of tolerance, and it's our ability to kind of cope with what is currently going on. So when little things happen or stressors happen or whatever, we're able to manage through it. We're able to work through it. You know, we're able to be okay, so to speak. However, you know, when we're out of that window, when our coping skills are overwhelmed, when we're feeling out of control, that's more that hyper arousal. And what's interesting about some of just people in general, but specifically African American girls, some of our windows of tolerance are really small based on our experiences and already being on edge and already being in defense mode. Our window of tolerance may be really small, where some of our window of tolerance who may not have had those significant experiences or may have worked through those experiences, their window of tolerance may be a lot larger. And so it's good to kind of keep that in mind because sometimes you may see that young lady who may go from 0 to 100. And you're like, well, all I said was, but that's because one, she's already on edge. She's already in defense mode. She's barely hanging on in that window. And so when something happens, that flight mode is triggering. You know, they're already anxious on edge, and that fight mode is triggering. So you see that angry response. You see that aggression verbally, or you see that aggression physically. And then, but we don't want to lose sight of the other responses when people are out of their window of tolerance. That shutting down, that numbing, maybe dissociation. Sometimes the response doesn't match what's going on. Maybe they should be a little bit more reactive or a little bit more verbal, but they're shut down, they're numb. Once again, that's their body's response. This is too much. We're going to shut down. We're going to clock out. And so we want to be aware of both of these. We want to be, and one of the things I teach my young ladies is to kind of recognize when they're out of their window of tolerance and the triggers that take them out of their window of tolerance. What triggers them? Usually it's disrespect, when they feel someone has disrespected them. Betrayal, when they feel like someone's betrayed them, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member. Usually those are the things that kind of trigger those behavioral responses, those off the cuff, aggressive, verbally or once again, physically aggressive responses. And we're looking like, why are you so angry? Remember before when I talked about the assumptions, why are you so angry? It's so interesting. In group the other day, I asked them, I said, have you ever gotten in a fight because you were hurt? And they're looking at me like, no. We get in the fight because we're angry. But then when I broke it down to them about their angry feelings, it was really coming from a place of being hurt. It was really coming from a place of feeling rejected or disrespected. It was really coming from a place of feeling out of control or taken advantage of, embarrassed or betrayed. That's where the aggression comes from. It looks a lot like anger, but it really comes from other emotions. And so how do we be intentional? How do we help these young ladies work through their emotions? How do we help them with their triggers and the things that cause these behavioral responses, these overreactions, so to speak? Simply just how we build an attachment with everyone else. Dr. Dan Siegel's 4 S's to attachment, a secure attachment. We help these young ladies feel safe. We help them realize physically and emotionally that school is a safe place for them, that they are protected, that they can come to us. A lot of times that girls who get in the fights, they usually talk to an adult before that fight happens. They usually have a safe person that they go to. And if that adult can secure them, that can help them feel comfortable, can talk them off the ledge, so to speak. It's so important. I always ask my young ladies, who is your safe person? Who is your safe person in school? Who can you go and talk to when you get that angry? Or when you can feel that angry, when you can feel that you're getting out of that window of tolerance? Who can you talk to? They need to be seen. Remember that feeling of rejection, that feeling of not being good enough, that feeling of fear of failure. That someone truly understands who they are, how they got here, the thoughts and feelings and experiences that they've had. When I tell a young lady, maybe I don't agree with the behavior, but it makes sense to me. It makes sense to me why you responded the way that you did. And they look at me in amazement like, oh, she gets it. Not that I agree all the time with the way that they handle things, but it makes sense that if you feel like you're out of control or that you don't want to be caught off guard, that you may go to a girl and start it just so you control the narrative. It makes sense to me so that they can be soothed. Once again, we can't match their energy. If they're here, we can't match their energy. We have to talk slower. We have to talk lower. We have to let them know that we are genuine, that we understand, and we understand. Not maybe that I don't believe all the events, maybe I don't agree with how things happen, but I believe how you feel. I trust your feelings. And then eventually maybe helping them to regulate. What you're feeling now is embarrassment. What you're feeling now is betrayal, shame, guilt. even though it may look like anger, or it may look like sadness. Let's explore these emotions, teaching them how they can take care and regulate their own emotions once they know what they are, once they normalize them, once they know that even though the response may not be a positive response, your emotions are yours and they're true. And I believe them. And lastly, being that secure attachment feeling figure that they can come to, that they can count on for support. Not necessarily, once again, the behavior, but I support your feelings toward the situation. I understand your anger. Someone that they can return to if needed. During the dramatic response, so they're amped up, they're in the heat of things. First of all, you want to be very aware of your own thoughts and feelings, because we know that if you're here, you could also trigger them. You could escalate the situation. You could make the situation worse. So noticing what you feel like in your body, how is this landed on me? What am I feeling like? What do I need to be thinking? What do I need to be feeling in this moment so that I'm not escalating the situation? Do I feel like I need to be in control? Do I feel like I need to be right in this situation? Seeking to understand and putting yourself in their shoes. Once again, I'm not dismissing the consequence. I'm not agreeing with the behavior, but I understand the feeling. I understand how hard this is for you to feel like you're not being understood. I know how hard this is for you to feel like you've been betrayed, because it triggers some of those feelings in the past when you were betrayed or disrespected. I'm preparing, I'm highlighting, triggering emotional responses. Let's be aware of those triggers. How can we prevent those situations? Maybe it means that she needs to be in your office, or maybe she needs to be in the advisor or a counselor's office to kind of deregulate the emotions, to kind of calm down. We're not throwing a whole lot of language at them. Because if they were thinking logically, if they were in that window of tolerance and thinking logically, we wouldn't be having this dramatic response. So a lot of words, a lot of jargon, a lot of threats, you're going to get detention or you're going to be suspended. Once again, they're out of the window of tolerance. So that logical stuff, that reasoning, it isn't going to matter in those moments. Logical thinking is out the window. Rational thinking is out the window when they're triggered like that. So refrain from talking logic. The best thing is to do is just to sit in silence and allow them to process their thoughts. Allow them to process their feelings. Maybe if they want to talk a little, maybe don't ask too many questions unless you feel they're calmed down, but just be a listener. And once again, slow down. Don't talk really fast. Don't ask a lot of questions. Lower and slower. Remember your nonverbal communication as well. How are you standing? How are you sitting? Are you proposing a threat to them? Or is your nonverbal communication more safe and inviting? Being very aware of yourself in these moments. What's driving the behavior? What's driving the anger? What's driving the behavioral response? We're always keeping that in mind. And what can I do in this very moment to build a relationship with this person? Because remember, the relationship is the key. If you're that safe and secure person, that is the key. That is the key. What can I do in this moment to build a relationship with this young lady or this little girl? After the dramatic response, once again, you're checking in with yourself. How am I feeling about this? Am I beating myself up because maybe I did say something wrong, or maybe I did escalate the situation? I remember one time I had some girls in a group together, and one of the three of the girls were totally against this other young lady. And I mean, it was all on our school over there. And I had this great idea of bringing them all together. Worst idea ever, because I couldn't control the narrative. And they just went off, and I beat myself up about it. I said, I should have never did that. I should have never brought them together thinking to resolve the situation like that. Focusing on your own thoughts and feelings about how you handle the situation. Do you need to show yourself some compassion and forgiveness? Maybe you didn't say the right thing. Maybe you escalated the situation. Maybe it went bad. Maybe they walked out of school. Whatever it is, we're not perfect. And we need to show our own selves compassion and forgiveness as well in how we handle situations. And then once we got to that point, how do we join and reconnect? You know, a lot of times I've apologized, I said, I am so sorry that I said A, B, and C, because I didn't realize that that was going to make you more angry, or that was a trigger for you, or that whatever. How do I join and reconnect with this young lady after the response, even sometimes after the consequence? But we're not saying don't consecrate it. But how do I join? How do I reconnect? How do I improve the relationship in this moment with this young lady? And then lastly, how can we plan for the next time? What are some new ways to help? Maybe when you're getting that angry, maybe I'll pay more attention. Maybe I'll do something different. Maybe I'll make sure that you're away from that young lady, or maybe I'll make sure that you're not in that classroom with that teacher when you're that angry. Maybe we'll give you a pass to go to the office if you feel triggered. What can we do to prevent it from happening again in the future? And then also, very important, how are we taking care of ourselves? Because once again, we have stuff, we have trauma, we have triggers, and sometimes these young ladies trigger stuff in us. Sometimes they trigger thoughts and emotions and feelings in us. Sometimes we're taking the activities or events of the day home into our houses and in with our families. How are we taking care of our own needs as well, so that we can show up as a better person in our role in the schools, or groups, or counseling, as well as in our role in our homes? How are we taking care? What practices do we have physically, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, socially, relational, safety and security? How are we engaged? What activities are we engaging in to show that we're taking care of ourselves, so that we're not out of our window of tolerance, so that we're not responding off past thoughts, feelings, experiences, and events? How are we settling our body and checking in with ourselves? Self-care is so very important. It's so very important that we're setting boundaries, that we're not taking stuff home with us, that we're saying no, that we're exercising, that we're getting plenty of sleep, that we're using positive self-talk. Even when we might not say and do things in the right way, maybe in that interaction with that young lady, maybe we escalated the situation. But we're able to forgive ourselves, and we're able to speak positively to ourselves. Activating support. Who can we talk to? When you're going through, especially those traumatic responses, and you're dealing with those young ladies or anyone, who do you talk to? Who are your supports? Who are your safety? Who are you secure with, that you can vent to and let some of your true emotions and thoughts and feelings out? Is so important. And be very mindful of vicarious trauma. When you're hearing about these stories that our students go through, these young ladies experience, these situations that they deal with, Be very aware of how those things affect us as well. Because sometimes it can cause the same experiences as if you were going through a trauma. And if you feel that self-care isn't enough, if you're not able, if you notice you're being triggered or you're taking a lot of stuff home or you have a weight, I always say it's good to care without caring. You care about these young ladies, you can support them, you can be that safe and secure person, but you can't carry it home with you. You can't carry it into your families and into your lives with your children or the other roles that you have in life. And if you feel that it is difficult for you to separate, if you feel like you're carrying a lot, please seek counseling. Get that support. Get that support because it can be a lot. It can be overwhelming to know about some of these things that our young ladies go through. And lastly, educate. Now that you have this information, educate the students. Train them about their window of tolerance. Train them. You were just triggered then. Because when I said this, or when she said that, that caused a response in you. Educate the students that you work with about trauma. So they'll know they're not just go falling off at a limb. That it makes sense sometimes how they feel so strongly about certain things, but the response may not be advisable. Educate other educators, your colleagues, the people you work with, teachers. I do a lot of training for teachers about trauma so that they don't take things personally when a student comes off at them. All I said was, had nothing to do with what you said. Or maybe you do need to be more in check about what we said, because sometimes we may say some triggering things. So teaching and educating educators as well as our family and friends and the people around us. It's not just your students who respond in these ways. It's not just African American girls who respond in these ways. It might be the kids in your home. It could be your cousins. It could be the girls in your church. How to educate people around you. Because when we educate others, we change generations. We change the narrative. These are some of the resources I use for this training. I hope that it was helpful. I hope that it's something that you can take away that can help in the work that you do, that can help with the students or the children, the youth, the young adults that you work with. I hope that you can take this information and it be viable to you in some aspects of your life. This is my contact information in case you do have any questions. I hope this was helpful and thanks so much. Thanks so much for your time.